So here we are talking about power, and in this segment of our playlist for the ultimate guide to espresso machines, we are going to talk about plugs. Because I have seen an assortment of plugs that come with espresso machines, and this is where you need to match it up to your outlet, and if it doesn't, there are two options. One is to change the plug, which we don't advise. We'd like to do that here, but we like to keep the original manufacturer's plug. So sometimes you need to change the receptacle or the outlet, which I strongly suggest that you hire a authorized, licensed electrician to do that, including any wiring, including doing the circuit breakers as well. Okay, hire somebody who's a professional, because a mistake can cost you in physical damages and personal injuries which we're not responsible for, including death. So here we have our standard 110 to 120 volt plug, and you will see on websites, including ours, where it says 110 volt, 120 volt, it's kind of the same. So just those are two interchangeable. So you have your two straight plugs and your ground, okay? And your hot comes in on one side depending on the electrician who set it up. So they usually will set it up. Now this also says that this plug is rated for 125 volts, but that's usually a 20 amp outlet, but you can still see it's rated for 125, but really 125 volts, but it's 15 amps. Here you'll see some plugs. Typically, if a plug is not on an espresso machine, we will try to use a 90-degree angle instead of a straight plug. Okay, so a 90-degree, but this is a 20 amp plug. If you watch the video about the outlets, you see you have one side that's horizontal and one side that's vertical with the ground. And as I mentioned, the 220 volt, okay, that's here, that I mentioned in the outlets video. If you look, ground is on the bottom, and look at this. You have the horizontal one in a different position. So it's really important. You can look at the ratings, the amperage, and the voltage on usually the cap or the side. You will find it on the outlet. Now here we have, you're like, wow, what's this? This is a 20 amp 125 volt. So this is a 20 amp and a 125 volt. Okay, and this one is called a NEMA 520P. This one is called a L520P. They look different. So that's the rating. So now we have a twist lock. Why would we use this? Typically in the commercial environment, you can see this, and we can install this, but we like the twist lock because once you put it into the outlet and twist it, it doesn't easily come out, okay? So we consider this a safety feature. You normally won't see this in homes, but I have. You'll typically see this in a commercial environment, but not necessarily in an office environment. If you have a generator, okay, typically you want to use this kind of plug, okay? And the reason is not just for safety, that it can easily come out, but also I think it handles better when there's spikes that go up and down with the generators. Okay, so you have that, and here we have the 220 volt straight plug. You'll see this on a lot of 220 volt machines. Here we have the 20 amp 250 volt, and this should be an L620P. Okay, the ground, and then typically two hots. And you'll typically see this on the 220. So you'll see this on the 110 to 125 volt machines. This will be on the 20 amp to 220 volt machines. Now here we have a 4-terminal one. Okay, we have a ground, neutral, and typically two hots. Some machines will have this at 30 amps. Now this plug says 30 amps, but it's actually 125 volt and 250 volt rated. See how confusing this gets? That's why you kind of need to watch the entire series of the electrical part of this ultimate guide to espresso machines, because this can become confusing. And sometimes you will, and most times you may have to hire a licensed or professional electrician. Here we have a 5-terminal plug. This usually we see in a convention hall. Okay, when we do some conventions or expositions, we're going to exhibit, we typically will see this. They like to use this because these are not general plugs that are used in other facilities, and it's a way for them to collect more money. And this one is rated, okay, this is a 30 amp, and this one's rated for 120 and 208 volts. We just checked our outlets, we're at 208 in the summertime, but the winter time it goes up to 220. So if you do choose this, okay, now it's a 220 volt outlet, so, and 20 amp. So if you do choose this, make sure you're not going over 208 volts. Okay, so you want to make sure that this 30 amp is going to max out at 208 volts. The reason, this can start melting down because there's plastic. Okay, and this is why it can become confusing on outlets. Now, is this a showstopper to buying an espresso machine? No, this is to learn to see what are the capabilities of the espresso machine versus the power requirements versus the plugs versus the outlets. And this is kind of something you need to think about more likely in a commercial environment. If you're building out a coffee shop or a cafe or a restaurant, what are the power requirements and the availability of power? Because you have a lot of other appliances. And again, it needs to be dedicated. Okay, dedication of the circuit breaker and the wiring is essential. Okay, let's move on to our next segment,